Going into the 1980s, DC Comics was in a major sales slump, with its only two popular titles being the New Teen Titans and the Legion of Superheroes, both of which were books that echoed the style of competitor Marvel Comics. With that in mind, Time Warner, DC's parent company, thought, well, why don't we just stop publishing comics altogether and license them out to Marvel?
Marvel was certainly intrigued by the idea, with writer-artist John Byrne immediately working on a pitch to modernize his favorite character, Superman. Unfortunately, the idea would be quashed as Marvel was facing a class-action lawsuit from several smaller publishers accusing them of monopolizing distribution, so the deal fell through.
Instead, DC would move on to their next idea, utilizing a 12-part comic called Crisis on Infinite Earths to streamline and update their heroes for modern times. In particular, Superman, who, to be honest, really needed it.
The Man of Steel may have put comics on the map, but as time went on, cracks began to appear on the facade. According to the storyline, no one had heard of Superman until he popped up one day and saved Lois Lane along with several others from a plane crash. But then there was another series that chronicled his adventures as Superboy, so how would you explain those? Likewise, Superman is supposed to be the last survivor of the planet Krypton, except for, Supergirl, Krypto the Superdog, and the occasional Phantom Zone escapee like Jaxer. Superman would be so powerful that he could literally destroy a planet with just a sneeze, so why would DC need any other superheroes, and, well, why wouldn't Superman just conquer the planet Earth entirely?
Now, there have been previous attempts to sort of readjust Superman in the past. Most notably, writer Denny O'Neil and artist Neil Adams had a storyline that saw the Man of Steel give up a major portion of his powers in order to neutralize all kryptonite on Earth. Unfortunately, the only change from that to really stick was that due to a corporate buyout, Clark Kent became a TV reporter instead of a newspaper reporter.
Also, I'm not saying that these stories were necessarily bad, per se. I mean, the last story before the proper reboot, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow by Alan Moore, is genuinely considered to be the greatest Superman story ever told. They just didn't really set the sales charts on fire. However, DC executive editor Dick Giordano remembered that John Byrne really wanted to work on Superman, and Byrne was now on the arts with Marvel due to unrelated reasons.
Byrne's Superman would feature no past as Superboy, no surviving Kryptonians like Supergirl, a dramatically reduced power set, and emphasize the fact that Clark Kent was Superman, rather than being the other way around as it had usually been depicted pre-Crisis. Now, the groundwork for Byrne's Superman would be laid forth in a 6-issue miniseries, with Byrne then transferring over to the ongoing Superman and Action Comics titles. Today, we're looking at that first 6-issue miniseries. This is Superman, the Man of Steel, Volume 1.
Jor-El of the planet Krypton rushes home and tells his robotic assistants Keelix and Kalor to prepare the Matrix chamber containing his unborn child. He explains to his frantic wife Laura that it's too late. Krypton's core is leaking and irradiating the very ground which they stand on, which is causing the ground to become dangerously toxic. Even if they could somehow insulate themselves, it wouldn't matter, as Krypton will then explode. The only hope for the Kryptonian race is to send their incubating child to a suitable planet. Jor-El discovered a place called Earth, in particular a region called Kansas. The thought of big shirtless Ron raising her child repels Laura, but Jor-El explains that Earth's yellow sun will allow the child Kal-El to become the most powerful being on the planet Earth, and maybe one day to rule it. Despite Laura's further objections, eruptions begin taking place all over Krypton, so Jor-El places the Matrix chamber into a rocket and launches it. As the ship takes off, an irradiated piece of the planet Krypton gets embedded in the tail.
I think you know the rest from here.
17 years later, Clark Kent is the leader of the Smallville High football team and breaking several Kansas State records. Though everyone revels in his glory, Clark's father, Jonathan, is very worried. He breaks up Clark's date with Lana Lang to take him for a drive out into the fields. In particular, a spot cordoned off from everything. It's where Clark's ship crashed, and where it's actually still buried, as Jonathan explains to Clark that he's adopted.
Well, that's understandable. I appreciate your transparency.
And Chibi Robo Ziplash is coming out.
No!
The way Clark's adoption was covered was thanks to a massive snowstorm hitting Smallville shortly after the crash happened that kept Jonathan and Martha farm-bound for a number of months, saying that it was just long enough for the pregnancy to have happened before the blizzard. Clark attempts to inspect the ship, but gets overwhelmed, forcing Jonathan to take him back to the car. As they head home, Jonathan explains that Clark and his abilities are here for a reason.
It's not to score touchdowns.
When the two get home, Clark tells his parents that he understands why they did what they did, but he needs some time to think things out for himself and heads out for a walk.
Meanwhile, Jonathan and Martha now have to figure out a way to pay for college, given the fact their son's going to give up football, which means he's not going to get a free scholarship. Oh well.
7 years later, the Kents are sitting down to breakfast when Jonathan notices a headline about a mysterious superpowered man saving an experimental space plane. They then find a despondent Clark sitting up in his room where he explains what happened. Clark has been living in Metropolis for the past 3 years and was part of a crowd watching the space plane take off on its test voyage. Shortly after lifting into the air, the plane's wing clipped another jet. Without thinking twice, Clark literally leapt into action and grabbed the wing of the plane to guide it back down to the ground, catching the eye of Daily Planet reporter Lois Lane along the way. Before anything else could happen, the two were swarmed by onlookers who were overwhelming everyone, including Clark, who barely managed to escape without being detected. Clark knows that he did the right thing and he does want to help people, but if everyone knows who he is, he'll be called upon to do things like clean out garages, move pianos, or do long division. He's going to need another way, which gives Jonathan an idea. Martha gets to work on a suit while Jonathan and Clark make a sigil based on the Kent coat of arms for the front part of the suit and the cape. Jonathan also lends Clark a pair of glasses and teaches him to start slouching his shoulders and slicking his hair back. Although, with this new tight outfit made from spandex by Martha.
For sure nobody's going to be looking at your face.
Yeah, I know Dean Cain's an asshead in real life, but that clip just works for here.
Metropolis' new Superman buzzes by Lois Lane and her editor Perry White as they pick up coffee. White demands a story, which Lois is all amped to get, ignoring a request from an unseen Lex Luthor as she chases after the Flying Man. As Lois tries to scout Metropolis, Superman breaks up a mugging before hearing about a liquor store being held up.
No need to worry about that liquor store. The police already have someone who can take care of that.
Drop the gun. You are under arrest.
Lois keeps arriving at these places just a tad too late to catch Superman, leaving her no choice but to take matters in her own hands. She willingly drives her car off a pier and into the river. It works, and Superman rescues her, and he flies her home. He admonishes her along the way as he had spotted an aqualung under her car seat. Still, he humors her with an interview afterwards. It was all for naught, though, as the next day Lois finds out that she's been scooped on Superman by the Daily Planet's newest reporter.
Up next, we have the Man of Steel's first encounter with a certain Caped Crusader from Gotham City. No, we're not going to do the whole Serve Martha bit. That's too cliched, and I've used enough mass media in this thing already.
Batman chases down a goon named Bull to learn about his employer who has been responsible for 8 deaths in Gotham City. The goon throws Slick's sledge into the Dark Knight's face and runs off. Batman's pursuit gets interrupted by Superman yanking on a zipline and insisting on taking the Batman in for being a vigilante.
Well, that's kind of hypocritical, don't you think?
Batman gets Superman to stop by pointing out that his suit contains a trigger to a bomb that will go off somewhere in Gotham City, killing innocent people. So the two will work together to find out who's been behind these killings in exchange for disarming the bomb. Batman explains that someone has been hitting jewelry stores throughout Gotham and killing the owners. All the signs point to a criminal named Magpie.
I already talked about Magpie when she appeared in a miniseries called Arkham Asylum Living Hell, which we covered in episode 137 of the Random Trade Review.
The two wind up hearing another explosion and trace it back to Magpie, who killed Bull, ironically thinking that he was being tracked. Magpie unleashes a gas bomb, which causes Superman to have to inhale and thus dispel the gas in Earth's atmosphere. Batman analyzes the thread left at the scene and traces it back to a mummy being held at the Gotham Natural History Museum. The two confront Magpie and cause her to have a mental breakdown by stealing her wig. Afterwards, Superman confronts Batman about the bomb, which it turns out was on the Dark Knight's utility belt the whole time. Batman needed to throw Superman off without technically lying. It's enough to send Superman back to Metropolis and stay out of Gotham City. For now.
Now, I've read that one of the ideas John Byrne had with this series was that there was a year passing in between each issue. Not a year as in real time, I mean a year in storyline time. But to me, it just really doesn't seem to feel that way, especially since we've also had 7-year gaps and like 1-day gaps in between this, so it still feels a little uneven to me. That being said, I do start to feel it right around this point.
Lois arrives fashionably early at Clark's to pick him up, and she's still upset over being scooped on that Superman story 18 months previously, and she continues to tell Clark off about it while he shaves, which is really a ruse involving an electric razor and a reflective piece of the ship that he arrived in. He finishes, and the two head to the roof for a Lex Luthor-arranged helicopter ride to his luxury yacht for a gala. Lois is on edge as she's repeatedly told Lex that she's not interested in his romantic pursuits, which is seemingly reinforced as he greets the two before asking Clark to leave the room. Things change when Lex lets slip that he bought Lois's dress as a present, causing her to call Clark in order to disrobe and borrow his jacket for modesty. Before they can leave, the yacht is invaded by Venezuelan terrorists who toss Clark overboard and take Lois and the others hostage. Of course, this gives Clark ample time to change into Superman and carry the ship back to harbor. He then intercepts a bullet intended for Lois, and the two work together to take down the terrorists, as Superman explains he got Clark to safety before picking the ship up. Lex Luthor then steps forward with a check revealing that he had hired the terrorists in order to lure out Superman. Superman turns down the money, and in a rather shocking move, Lex is arrested for his actions. He's out a few days later and angrily confronts Superman after the Man of Steel dropped off a woman in labor at the hospital. Lex swears that sooner or later he'll stand over Superman's dead body.
And give or take about 5 years, he will.
Lex proceeds to spend the next few months going after Superman, in one case sending a lackey in an armored suit after the Man of Steel. When confronted about this, Luthor points out that the armor had been listed as stolen 2 weeks earlier, so there's no way to pin any of this on him. Superman leaves with a message.
I'll be watching you, Luthor.
However, Luthor was actually doing some watching of his own, as he had a Chinese scientist named Tang run a molecular bioscan of Superman in order to replicate the Man of Steel and make one of his own. However, the scanner was working on the assumption that Superman is human, with his alien heritage not being public knowledge, meaning that when the cloning chamber opens, Lex's Superman collapses and begins disintegrating into something. Luthor immediately disowns the clone and begins demanding that a new one be made. Hopefully this one can talk. As this plays out, Lois tends to her ailing sister Lucy, who was recently blinded during a chemical attack on her flight she was attending.
In case you were wondering, it is heavily implied that Lex Luthor was behind the chemical attack that rendered Lucy Lane blind.
Lucy puts up a strong front, but shortly after Lois leaves for work, Lucy elects to throw herself over the edge of the penthouse terrace. However, this act is overheard by Lex's Superman clone, who rushes off and catches Lucy before she can hit the pavement. Still blinded, Lucy thinks the real Superman saved her as she's dropped off back at the penthouse. Lex's Superman then decides to head to work, stopping off to steal a cheap suit and some glasses along the way. Thinking he passes as Clark Kent, the commotion caused at the Daily Planet reception area brings the real Superman into the scene, only to be greeted by... The two begin duking it out in the streets of Metropolis, Bizarro having the upper hand because Superman is too used to fighting people weaker than him and is holding back. Bizarro then grabs Lois and takes off back to her apartment, where Lucy points out that she's been experiencing the slow return of her sight after her interaction with what she still thinks is Superman. Superman arrives and the fight resumes, destroying Lois' safety deposit along the way. The two then tumble outside the building, where Bizarro elevates back in the air for one last charge. Superman also charges into Bizarro, and in the collision, Bizarro winds up exploding. However, the explosion has a side effect, as the skin flakes from the failed clone somehow restore Lucy's eyesight, almost as if he knew that it was going to happen.
Yes, there would be more Bizarros in the future, right down to what you normally think of as the mirror image of Superman, right down to Bizarro M #1 villain speak.
Clark heads back to Smallville for a vacation and to fill Jonathan and Martha in on everything in his life, in particular Lois Lane, though Jonathan seems a bit more concerned with something else. After a hearty meal, Clark sneaks down for some midnight slice of rhubarb pie, only to be greeted by a vision of Jor-El. The spirit of Clark's biological father is only speaking Kryptonian, but soon reaches out and touches Clark's head, which causes Clark's mind to begin filled with the sights and sounds of people of Krypton. Just as he begins to recognize Laura as his biological mother, Clark soon finds himself out in front of Lana Lang's home. He's confused, as Lana was supposed to have left town years ago, but she came back and asked the Kemps to keep quiet. Lana and Clark had always been close, but that all changed the night he found out his true lineage. She thought that Clark was going to propose to her, but instead he spoke about changing the world and helping those in need. He then showed off his powers by taking her for a little test flight, and it was then that she knew that Clark could never be hers and he belonged to the world.
Fun fact, before the Crisis reboot, Clark and Lana Lang actually did start a romantic relationship as adults, mainly due to the fact that Lana knew Clark's identity as Superman and was okay with it, which is something Clark feared Lois would never be with him.
Lana assures Clark that she knows he didn't mean to hurt her, but he's still shook up as he leaves. He spent the whole time talking about Lois Lane, and now he's worried about possibly doing the same thing to her that he did to Lana. He happens across where his ship was supposedly buried, only to find it gone. It's then that Jor-El returns to fill Clark's head once more with knowledge of Krypton. This gets interrupted by the Kents arriving and Jonathan attacking the ghost with a shovel. However, all the information swirling around in Clark's head causes him to fly off in order to sort things out. He's now aware of his true Kryptonian heritage. But in the end, that really doesn't mean much to him. Krypton might be his birthplace, but it's not his home. He is not Kal-El of Krypton. He is Clark Kent, Superman of Earth.
And that concludes Volume 1 of Superman the Man of Steel. Now I should clarify a little bit here. There are Volumes 2 and 3 and 4, but that covers Byrne switching over to the ongoing Superman titles. There would eventually be an ongoing series also called Superman the Man of Steel, but that's in its own separate collection. Okay. So, anyway, yes, that concludes Man of Steel Volume 1. How was it? Well, I do think there's some really good artwork throughout all of this. The characterization feels really spot on. Superman feels like Superman. Clark Kent feels like Clark Kent. Everyone feels rounded and grounded and like real characters. And I see the influence throughout all of this. We just saw, as you've seen influence in this with Lois and Clark, The Adventures of Superman. Superman the Animated Series. Dare I even say Zack Snyder's Man of Steel is influenced by this. So you see how important this was in modernizing Superman for relevant times. If I do have a major complaint, it's that the final issue is just kind of dull, where Clark comes back to Smallville and reunites with Lana Lang. It's just really kind of blah. It doesn't feel that important. Like, it feels like something that maybe should have been in a double-sized first issue, not a single-sized 6-issue to round it out. It just falls flat in my opinion. But that being said, it's a rather minor quibble overall. Like I said, this is really fun. I do think this is a great jumping-on point if you are interested in reading any Superman books. Superman, the Man of Steel, Volume 1 gets an A. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review.
Hey guys, remember you can help support the channel at patreon.com/sleepytimeforcat productions. There you can request a trade to be put in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box. And as always, remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring that notification bell.